Welcome to Tinkering with Felski. In this clip, I'm working on disassembling the ideal number one stencil machine. Everything has been soaking and penetrating oil for a while, so everything actually came apart pretty well. A few parts that were a little confusing, like figuring out how to get the carriage removed, but with just a little bit of thinking and looking through the problem, I was able to get everything apart, which I mentioned in the previous episode was important because there are some bent parts, some broken parts, and just generally this thing is gunked up from being so darn old. Um, the machine is pretty heavy, so at times it was a little tricky by myself moving things around, but I managed to get apart what I had to. Um, at the end of the day, I didn't end up taking the entire machine apart. I kind of went with that adage of if it isn't broke, don't fix it. So I did take off the dial. I took off the carriage. A lot of the pieces did get apart. And then for these parts that I ended up leaving on, I just used a degreaser that is water based that supposedly doesn't need to be rinsed afterwards, which is nice over the some of the other degreasers that I was afraid might affect the paint. Because I'm not doing a full restoration. In other words, I'm not going to strip it and repaint it. I actually like the appearance of the old school age of the machine. I like seeing where some of the chrome is wore off and some of the paint is wore off from its years of use. My only goal is to make it fully functional. Here's the side profile of the carriage. You can see with the straight edge rested against it how bent it is. Also, you can see that the track that it rides on is also bent. My solution for this was to take it to Jim at Frederick Machine. This guy was an ace. He was able to get this thing straightened out on a hand press, just basically eyeballing it. And within 2 to 3 minutes of just doing this, he handed it back to me, and it rode perfectly on the track. The amazing thing was he only charged me for a couple dozen donuts that he wanted me to drop off for the guys at his shop. Really, really great folks over there. Um, so other issues I had to deal with. You can see here that the recoil spring is broken. I didn't film myself fixing it. It was just too much of a headache. But long story short, I was able to, with a pair of needle nose pliers, take out the broken piece and put a new one in. I ended up doing a lot of other cleaning on the machine that I didn't bother filming, like the little brass plate that goes above the spring mechanism. I buffed that up just to bring back the shine of the brass. The sheet metal that looks kind of like trapezoid shaped, those I also cleaned with steel wool and oh, what was it, like a chrome cleaner. Um, right here, what I'm doing is reassembling the slide mechanism or the carriage mechanism. And it was a little bit of trial and error because I had no way of knowing how strong that spring was going to be. So figuring that I just want enough spring tension to bring the carriage back without it drastically jerking. I did put it together and disassemble it a few times to kind of get it right. I had a funny moment where I had a bottle of oil that I was using to clean and polish up the machine, and the carriage unit actually like hit it and it went all over the floor and I got oil everywhere. So it's reminding me I probably shouldn't be doing these projects in my kitchen, but but it's comfortable in there, and who doesn't want to work on their project on their kitchen table, right? The rest of the reassembly went pretty well. Here I'm wiping some sewing machine oil onto the old paint and applying some of the same oil to moving parts. This is something I'd left over from a previous project where I restored an old industrial Singer sewing machine. Um, the reassembly on the underside went pretty well. There was this linkage piece that was a little bit of figuring to do. It was actually unattached when I received the machine. Um, which I guess isn't surprising because that carriage wouldn't move. The previous owner probably detached it so that they could still at least get the machine to halfway work. These other pieces went together quite easily. I had taken some pictures in case there was parts I forgot, but everything was pretty straightforward. One side note, that piece in the first video that I mentioned that was broken, that I thought would have to be brazed. When I went to see Jim at the machine shop, he told me that he wouldn't worry about it. Basically, it came down to be a really expensive part to have brazed and machined, and since it's still functional, don't sweat it. He said bring it back if it stops working, but now that I've got the thing actually back together and I'm using it, I think he was spot on. It's not a big concern. Um, as far as the dial indicator goes, I had to make sure things lined up correctly so that way when it was pointing to a T, making sure that it was actually the letter T that was being printed. Well, I'm down to just the linkage and a few other small pieces to reassemble, and then it'll be time to see if this thing works. I've decided that I'm going to save that for a third and final video, troubleshooting any problems I may have, and then seeing if this thing works, or rather how this thing works. So stay tuned for a third and final video, and thanks for watching. If you enjoy this, please like and subscribe.